New York, and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles. Rosenberg's on his way to NBA All-Star. He's hosting a celebrity game?
The Celebrity All-Star game,
NBA,
yeah.
you know he works for ESPN. Ladies and gentlemen, AfricanAncestry.com in the building right now. Yes. Introduce yourself to the people.
I'm Gina Paige. I'm the president and co-founder of African Ancestry.
And how long ago did you found African Ancestry?
Next week is our 16th anniversary.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So before any of the companies you see on television, we were doing this work, pioneering this work for Black people.
And the catalyst, obviously, for Black folks is we don't have a way before this existed to understand our direct connection other than some generalizations about West Africa and what we've been told to find out where we are from in Africa, correct?
Exactly. So people do a lot of genealogy research. They go through census records and marriage and birth records and family Bibles and all that kind of information. But Black people weren't recorded as human beings in a census with names and families and locations until 1870. So you can do genealogical research, but you're going to eventually hit a brick wall.
Right.
And we can't use our names. There are no Pages in Africa.
Right.
There are no Dardens in Africa.
No.
So we don't have anything except our DNA.
And so when you first started doing this, what is your educational background?
So I have a degree in economics and an MBA.
Okay.
So I commercialized the research that my business partner had done. He's a geneticist. He has
Got
a
it.
PhD.
Got it.
And so
what's his name?
His name is Dr. Rick Kittles.
And I researched him too, and he's been doing this for a long time as well.
Yeah, he's a leading researcher in the field of African American genetics and African genetics.
And so you commercialize it. How hard was it to get Black folks to understand this, information or the
Right.
desire to even want to have it?
Because, there's all these, conspiracies. They're going to steal my DNA and cloning and all this, crazy stuff. And I know that when I started experimenting with it, because I did Ancestry DNA first.
Okay.
Then I got my results, and then I did African Ancestry DNA. So I was like, when I did it, so many people were like, why did you do that? I'm like, because
Right.
I want to know about my family tree, where I came from.
Right.
And I didn't do ancestry. I wasn't messing with 23andMe. Y'all not getting nothing. And I read articles. They were selling it to
You see?
big pharmaceuticals. I'm not
that's
messing
true.
with y'all. But when I heard about you, I was like, you know what? I'm going to trust the Black woman. I'm going to go in.
Hey now. So listen, that's a loaded question. How difficult was it? For us, it was very difficult because there's so many layers. First of all, you have to talk to Black people who believe they're from Africa. That's the first thing. Then,
So wait. So can we spend time on that? Spend time with me on that. Which Black people don't believe they're from Africa?
there are a number of people who say, I'm not African. I'm not from Africa.
Well, I've had these conversations, and they say I'm Native American, but not understanding that even those Native Americans were intermixing with African sailors and travelers and explorers prior to the European ones.
Well, where do they say they're from then?
I'm American. That's what they
Oh.
say. I'm American. I'm not from Africa.
But do they not know the connection between? Do they not know
Look,
history?
It doesn't make sense to me either. I can't call it. What we know is that we're not taught anything positive about Africa.
That's right.
When you ask people from little kids to adults, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Africa? You
Poor.
get poverty,
Right.
disease,
Right.
little kids that look like me who are starving, breakout. I mean, it's
Ebola,
nothing,
blah, blah,
right?
blah.
There's
Right.
nothing booty scratchers.
Right.
There's nothing positive.
And they got European booty scratchers. I saw one. Dude was walking down the street the other day scratching his ass.
So you can understand on some level why someone wouldn't want to be connected to
That's
the
right.
continent. It's just ignorance.
That's
That's
right.
all it is. So we deal
But it's so pervasive
Right.
that people 100% in their mind have, I am not from there. I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Then you have the people who understand that they're from Africa but don't care to know
Oh,
where.
right. Yeah, they just,
Right?
it doesn't even matter.
And then you have the people who are so Pan-African that they're scared that if they find out something about a specific country that they lose their Pan-African card or something like that.
I see.
And then you have the people...
And not understanding that blackness in America is, by definition, mixed.
Right. Exactly.
And a part of a larger black family.
Exactly.
Right, because of the transatlantic slave trade.
Or if they understand that, they still just feel like their identities perhaps are rooted in Pan-Africanness, so they can't show favorites. I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me either. Then you have people who say, well, it's not possible. 16 years ago, it's not possible to tell people where they're from in Africa. You all can't do that. So there are people who didn't believe the science. Again, it's all just a situation where education is important.
So let's get into the lineage and DNA and how it actually works. You swab your mouth, right? Like all of the different services provide the same thing. From that saliva, what is being discovered?
So let me explain it to you like this. We each inherit 50% of our DNA from our mother and 50% from our father. So if your mother's yellow and your father's blue, what color are you going to be?
Green.
Exactly. So we're all green. So we're green, but there's a little bit of yellow that you inherit from your mother that doesn't mix with anything you get from your father. It stays yellow. That's called mitochondrial DNA. We all get it from our mother. She got it from her mother. She got it from her mother for generations, 500 to 2,000 years. That little bit of the DNA doesn't change. So from your saliva or from your cheek cells, we take that little yellow dot and we unlock the code and then compare it to yellow dots from all over the world. At African Ancestry, we have the largest database of African yellow dots, if you will, African lineages.
So like in Ebro's case, his mother's white, right?
Right.
So how would you unlock his African ancestry through his mother's?
There isn't any African ancestry in his mother's genes. His maternal ancestry is going to go back to Europe.
Okay.
Which is why we didn't have him take that test.
It's Bessarabian. It's like some Moldovia in Romania somewhere.
So how do you find his African ancestry?
So we have to look at another branch of the family tree. And in his case, it would have to be a branch on his father's side.
So I had to go get my cousin Velma,
who
lives in Richmond, to do the test. So because her mom and my grandmother are sisters.
So we could trace his father's yellow dot through that family member.
Because my father passed.
Right.
The other side is that when you are green and you have this yellow dot from your mother, the brothers in the room also have a blue dot from your father. A little bit of DNA that you inherited, that's the Y chromosome. Right. That's what makes y'all dudes. That didn't change. So you have the same Y chromosome as your father and his father and his father all the way back.
Now, there's a plot twist for black men, though.
Yes.
Which is?
So when we trace the paternal ancestry of black men, 35% of the time, that blue dot goes back to Europe, not to Africa.
Why?
Because of the behaviors of slave traders, slave holders, and other European men.
So basically you're saying white men were having so much sex with black women on a, 3 out of 10 ratio.
They were having brown babies.
They were having brown babies that frequently, 35% of the time.
Yes.
And that has been passed down into black American heritage at that rate.
Exactly, because and it doesn't matter what you look like, whether you look like Shawnee or you.
Well, Shawnee, you already know. What's your great-grandfather?
My great-great-grandfather was a slave master who raped my great-great-grandmother.
Well, there you go. So it would make no sense. At African Ancestry, we trace the lineages that you don't know. Ebro knew his mother's line, so we don't need to trace that. Shawnee, you know your father's line. We don't need to trace that. We're tracing the lines that you don't know. Now, the other companies, they look at the green. They look at everything all mixed together.
Got it.
And that's why they give you your some percentage from here, some percentage from there.
Right.
And so that's valuable if you're trying to look at your entire mixture. However, I'll let all the black Americans know the average black person is 75% African, 25% European. So I'm not quite sure you need a DNA test to tell you that. But where we stand out is that when it comes to Africa, not the health traits, not your fifth and sixth cousins, but when it comes to Africa, we give you the most specific information. So like we said for Chadwick Boseman, you share ancestry maternally with the Limba people in Sierra Leone today. The other companies can only say you're some percentage somewhere in your family.
West African.
Right. And that's because we have the largest database of African lineages. We have 33,000 African lineages from all over the continent, but primarily West and Central Africa. The other companies have no more than 2,000 African lineages.
Wow.
So if you want
Very
specificity.
So, the power of this information has been received by non-Black people in what way?
Multiple ways. So on one level, non-Black people get it. They get the value because they already know where they're from.
Right.
Everybody else knows where they're from.
And there's pride in that.
And there's pride in it.
And there's a kind of self-assurance and confidence.
So when they look at the work, they're excited because they know the power that it's going to give Black people. The flip side of that is they know the power it's going to give Black people. So we have so many detractors in the science field, particularly, who try to take away from the work. And I think that's because they understand the power and they just don't want us to know.
And in your opinion, what is the power in Black people knowing exactly, specifically, tribally where they're from?
I'll say this. It's immeasurable. The power is immeasurable. And we'd be here all day if I told you all the reasons I think it's important. But the bottom line is, if you don't know where you're from, you can't know who you are. It's just that simple. You cannot, if you don't have a connection, if your only connection that you know is to a group of slaves on a plantation in Mississippi, then the possibilities of what you can see for yourself are extremely limited.
Limited to that?
They're limited because you feel like you came from a place of victimhood. But when you know that your people are the Mandinka people living in Senegal today, and that they're the griots of the culture, that they keep the history through oral tradition, and that they were, that they were people who excelled in fishing or any of those details. Now you know the practices, the values, the traditions, the beliefs that came before this very tiny period in our history. And that makes people sit up taller, stand taller, walk prouder, not take any stuff from the people that go around us. And it eliminates the confusion. We come from such powerful people. Everything began on the continent of Africa. We're the descendants of that.
And we're still here, surviving.
And we're still here. So we are the best of the best of those who survived that Maafa. And so when you know that, then you don't make crazy statements like, make America great again. We built this. It's already great. We made it great. You don't make poor decisions. You don't look for people to tell you what you can and can't do because you know what you can do because you know the history of the people that have already done it. And that DNA is inside of you and it has memory.
Do you find that people who have found out what tribe they're from or the connection they have with the continent have now adapted those ways into their now current life in terms of like food or traditional, you said fishing or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it already exists. So think about the Mende people of Sierra Leone. They were rice planters, and that's why they were taken from Sierra Leone and brought to South Carolina and Georgia. It was to work the rice plantations. So when I tell people who are from that area that they share ancestry with the Mende, they start to see that the Gullah language is a direct descendant of it's practically the same as what the Mende speak in Sierra Leone. Their love of rice, the way they use rice in their culture, in their family is the same. So a lot of it is already there, and we just don't even know why. The names in our families, we don't know how we got them.
In America, black people don't even know what Gullah is. A lot of people don't even know down in South Carolina and Atlanta and outside of Georgia that there is a whole African settlement. To this day, you could take tours. They weave baskets. They have a whole culture and practices that they have maintained through the entire time that they were brought here. And the Gullah people along the Ogeechee River and down there. And a lot of people don't even know that that's a thing in America.
Right. But the other thing, too, Shawnee, is that we do see people adopting the practices. So people are traveling, and when they go to the countries that they're from, they immediately start to absorb what they're learning and what they're experiencing, and even how they identify themselves. So in 2010, we've traveled with 54 people who we had traced their ancestries to Cameroon. And we all went to Cameroon. And when they met at Dulles Airport in D.C., they were African Americans who found their ancestry in Cameroon. By the time the plane landed in Cameroon, they were Cameroonian Americans. They got off the plane calling themselves Cameroonian Americans. And after 3 days of a 10-day trip, they started calling themselves Camericans. And to this day, the Cameroonian community, in large part, that interact with people we've traced to Cameroon, refer to those people as Camericans. That's a complete identity shift.
Yeah.
That's power.
Have you found any success stories where people dug deep and actually found relatives?
So I haven't heard of those based on our DNA test because those 33,000 lineages in our database were collected anonymously. Our database is going on like 20, 25 years old. So back then, when you were collecting data, people weren't giving their names and email addresses and all of that. Right. So, but I have heard of people kind of going off and doing more extensive DNA testing and finding people that they share ancestry with. Yeah.
Back to what you were saying about the people who were brought to work the rice fields, right? Mm-hmm. A common misconception about slavery is the people who were taken from Africa were not skilled workers.
Yes.
And so, until you're privy to what was really happening and actually paying attention, you don't understand that they were actually taking human beings that had skills that would benefit this new country financially.
Yeah, because slavery was a business.
Yes.
It was a business. So they didn't just get random labor. They got the labor that was going to work best for their profitability.
It was very skilled workers.
Yeah.
And, so I've seen it more recently where it's become more commonplace to not to say slaves were taken from Africa, right? No, these were skilled workers, mothers, fathers, right? Sometimes business owners who were taken from Africa and turned into slaves.
And enslaved, exactly.
Right.
We are not the descendants of slaves.
The AfricanAncestry.com, you go there, you can order your kit. They send you everything. It's super fast.
We destroy all of your DNA once a result is determined, and we don't sell, share, or research our customers'
Now, I know you're not going to disparage or slander any of the other companies, but it is true that 23andMe and Ancestry.com have done deals with big pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, that's in the news. Yes,
and
they have.
what is the point of that?
So the point of that is African Americans, well, as it relates to us, African Americans have more genetic variation than any other group. That means when you look at our DNA, you see all kinds of differences.
And that's because Africa has more genetic variation?
Yes, it's because Africa is the cradle of civilization. And so the most diversity is found on the continent of Africa. And so when you're researching drugs and cures, drugs for cures or for whatever, you want to do the research on the population that has the most diversity. Because when you find a cure for whatever you're researching based on diversity, it'll work for more people. And so that's why they are doing deals with pharmaceutical companies, because they need access to genetic information in order to create drugs that help people. And in our case, we don't do that. Because we understand, and the controversy is they weren't upfront about what they were doing.
Right.
Or if
so you think this was their intention all along?
It's absolutely their intention all along, because that's where the money is. That's why those
Data
tests.
collection.
Right. That's why those tests cost $99, $59, $49, because they're making their money on the back end when they do the research and sell the information.
Because we are living in, what do they call it? The era of big data, right? Like that's where business is at. And a lot of people think big data is just your behavior on technology. But big data is really your body.
Yeah.
And what's going on with your body and your lineage and that whole business.
It's very valuable. And so that's why. And so when you see these initiatives where people are giving away tests free to Black folks, it's because they want our DNA. And you know, I'm not going to pass judgment on that on the air, but as long as you understand what you're doing and who you're giving your information to, then that's fine. But if you're not reading the fine print, if you're not taking the time to do your research, then you're at the whim of whoever you give your information to.
Is there a war going on outside on melanin and brown people and continuing to force them into economic situations to keep them in the control of white supremacists?
I don't think that has ever stopped.
All right, I was just checking. I wanted to see if he was there with me.
That has never stopped. But you know what? We have the power to change that. We don't have to let white supremacy rule us. But it takes knowing who you are. It takes knowing that you have power and finding out your specific ancestry on the continent of Africa gives you some of that power to break those chains.
Do you go, other than going to Cameroon and taking people back, how often do you go other places? How often do you go?
I do go other places. Last year, we went to Ghana twice.
I was in Ghana.
I know you were in Ghana last year as well. We partner with the Adinkra group. They take people to the continent and specifically to Ghana for what's called the Back to Africa Festival. You know music. So last year they took Backyard Band, which is a go-go band in D.C., and had a cross-cultural exchange with the Ghanaian drummers and other performers. And that's powerful, particularly for D.C., because go-go is African.
That's right.
It just is. This year, they're getting ready to go at the end of this month with Crossroads, Wes Felton and Raheem Devon.
Okay.
But we are planning African Ancestry family reunions. So once you find out what country you come from, then we're curating trips for people who've taken our tests to have very specific experiences based on their ancestry.
That's
so
amazing.
I'm excited about that.
It was a pleasure to hear you speak today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I had the most warm welcome when I walked in here. I don't want to leave now. I'm like, hey.
Come back anytime. Come back anytime.
Yeah, and we have to tell you all where you're from.
Yeah, I know. We're going to find out.
We need the big reveal.
It's going to come out that I'm 100% European.
Whoa.
Rosenberg is
going to be from the Congo.
Right.
Yo, thank you so much. AfricanAncestry.com.